Hello, and welcome to another U.S. Tech Workers podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Lynn, and today is July 11th, 2019, and I am joined once again by Adele Smith. We have a lot to talk about and a short time to do it in, and we're going to really focus on what happened yesterday in the Congress with the passage of 1044. As many of you know, and we're watching along with C-SPAN with me, you saw some real, a lot of, let's just call it a lot, it was fast and loose being played with the truth, the testimony that was being given on the floor of the Congress. You know, in particular, Adele, I'm glad to have you on because I want to play a clip from Zoe Lofgren, and I'd like to get your feedback on it. But without any further ado, Adele Smith, welcome to another podcast.
Thank you very much, Kevin. I appreciate the time.
Great. Well, great to have you here. As I just mentioned, 1044 was passed. They suspended the rules. They pushed it through, whipped up any dissent on the bill, got it passed by a pretty overwhelming margin because when you look at the numbers, it was... Boy, I had to put my reading glasses on because I smashed
365 to 65.
Yep, 365 to 65. 225 Democrats yay, 8 nay. 140 Republicans yay, and 57 nay. And 3 not voting. So yeah, pretty dismal from a vote standpoint, and it certainly means for us the fight is now on in the Senate. Now, frankly, I always kind of saw the House as a lost cause on this bill, but I really wanted to come down and go through full process where we would see a lot of lively debate on both sides. And they basically allowed for just 20 minutes of debate. That was it. And that's a tragedy because this is a highly, highly controversial bill. So I could imagine, Adele, you're pretty disappointed with the whole thing.
Yeah, I don't think disappointed really is quite the right word. I think I was more horrified.
Yeah, awful. Just absolutely awful. And what I want to do, Adele, is I want to play, Lofgren got up to speak a couple times. And it was towards the end because what she was saying, I found really familiar with a number of your points. It was almost like they had listened to you, taken notes, you and your members of your coalition, and regurgitated them for the opposition. It was crazy, but here it goes. I'm going to go ahead. I want to share my screen here, ladies and gentlemen. Take a moment there. There we go. Rolling and action.
Is recognized.
I yield myself such time as they may consume. I do want to address the points made by the ranking member of the full committee. You know, this bill has been around a while. It was introduced in 2011. At that point, we did have a hearing and even a markup. We've had it on the floor before. We have, at this moment, 312 members on the bill, bipartisan. Addressing the issue that he was reading, and I don't think it's at all confusing. The Department of State is actually the agency that allocates the priority dates. They keep track of the visas, and we have communicated with them frequently over the years. We provided in this bill a transition period because as time has gone on, the delays have gotten even worse. For large countries. And so we wanted to put a transition period. That's what the section that he read about would do. We do think that...
I want to comment on that transition period, Kevin, because...
And stop the share. Okay, Adele, what did you think about, because it sounded like you heard what I heard, the transition period.
Yeah, there's a number of points that we find are that points of disinformation that we really are trying to debunk. And we've done well, I don't know how good of a job we did. We did a much better job of it in the Senate so far than we have in the House. But that transition period is a very poor period. It's very poorly done, and there's a lot of disinformation about exactly what goes on. It sounds great, right? So does the do no harm clause. That sounds great too. But here's the thing about that transition period. It only provides enough green cards to last the rest of the world for 4 months. 4 months. That's it.
I mean,
that's it.
When you look at the numbers, we're talking one country that maximizes 17% of all the green card employment visas, leaving the rest of the 83% of the world's population competing for that same pool. I mean, this is why someone from Pakistan might be waiting for a green card for a year or two at the most. Yet someone from India is waiting for 14 years. Well, because they've clogged the system.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. I mean, all of this centers back to a very abused and oversubscribed H-1B visa. You can't have one country occupying 75% of the H-1B visa and not expect that country there's going to be problems with the system. Now, the way this works, like with the rest of the world, every single country in the world, this program, this system actually works perfectly fine because nobody's abusing it.
It does. That's the thing, and that's why I'm excited to get your opinion on what Zoe says next, because to the heart of the matter, the fact that Indians dominate our H-1B system because the third party consulting firms like Tata, Cognizant, Capgemini, Ernst & Young, they monopolize the system. They flood it with hundreds of thousands of applications for H-1B visas. And so and the thing is, unlike other countries, people coming from India, for the most part, on an H-1B visa, employed by a Tata, these are quite ordinary workers. These are not these exceptionally talented professionals, people who might come up with the cure for cancer tomorrow, or totally re-engineer the iPhone and make it something amazingly successful and make America ever more competitive. So I want to have you take a listen, Adele, to the remainder of Zoe's speech at that point. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and share our screen again. I have to apologize. I have the sniffles, it's allergies, and a messed up septum on my part. Okay, here we go.
I recently met with a physician and his wife, who's also a physician, who are here on H-1B visas, and they have been for a number of years. They are serving a medically underserved community. Their children, who are here legally as dependents of them, are about to, quote, age out, which means that they haven't been back to the country of their birth in who knows how long. They don't speak the language. They don't have anybody in the country of their birth, and they are about to be out of status, even though they've played by all the rules. Those two physicians told their patients that they were going to close their practice and move to Canada because they just couldn't go on like this. That's not a situation we can countenance. That's happening all over the country. We need to fix it. This bill does fix it, and I hope that we can support it, and I would reserve the balance of my time.
Okay.
Yeah, I was actually tweeting out live when I was hearing that. The horror that I experienced when I heard that was just beyond description. Our group actually spoke with both Rep. Lofgren's and Rep. Ken Buck's office, and I feel like they just pretty much took all of our talking points and turned them around back at us, which is actually some of the things that I did tweet out. I don't know if she's confused or not, but physicians that are working in rural areas generally are filing under a national interest waiver because
Right.
that's actually one of the requirements there. They're not on H-1B visas. There's very few physicians actually that go,
Very
if any,
few.
go at all through.
Because what
Sorry.
I've looked through the LCA data, these are typical
Yeah.
postdoc researchers. Very few physicians are here on an H-1B. So where she came up with this, and at the same time, as you know, we've been promoting our site, Doctors Without Jobs. I mean, we want to help better serve underserved communities in America. Hey, that's 6% of people that graduate from U.S. medical colleges, pass their USMLEs, don't get a residency. Well, make sure they get residencies, and we go a long way to serving those communities. So, yeah, the disinformation and hypocrisy I find just stifling.
Yeah, disinformation, misunderstanding. Yeah, I mean, I could go on from there, right? Which I don't think I need to. But physicians serving in rural areas are not on H-1Bs. They self-file under a national interest waiver because that's one of the requirements. There's two requirements on national interest waiver for physicians. It's number one, Department of Veteran Affairs, or number two, you serve in a rural area. And the difference between an H-1B visa is very significant from a national interest waiver. A national interest waiver, they self-file. H-1B visa, their employer would actually file, as you pointed out, labor certification on their behalf to actually start the perm process. It's not the way most physicians go. But what's significant about this and was really heartbreaking to me was the fact that she was showcasing physicians. Firstly, she was misidentifying exactly what kind of visa they were on and what they were doing here, but she was showcasing physicians, and that's our message. Our entire group is about MDs and researchers and scientists, MDs and PhDs, because they're very, very vulnerable under this legislation. And with regards to the rural area there, the rest of the world, these are the statistics that are really astounding that she did not say, even taking into account, regardless of what type of visa, NIW, where they are in that process, it doesn't matter. The numbers themselves are really astounding because there's about 870,000 physicians in the United States. At least this statistic comes from 2015. Of that number, 215,000 are foreign doctors. So fully almost 1/4 of every doctor, 25% of all doctors in the United States are foreigners. Now, of that 25%, 80% of that number, 80% are from rest of the world. They are not from India. So what that means is that 1 out of every 5 doctors that are here are from the rest of the world. They are not from India. The vast majority of physicians are not Indian physicians. They are from the rest of the world. And that it's so significant.
And
I mean,
those are the people that will be hurt by 1044. You had mentioned researchers. I mean, we have some, I've met on the phone several people in your organization. These are really talented people, and this is going to hurt them.
Oh, well, the issue of the PhDs is slightly different than the MDs, but the issue of the PhDs is one that's really hits me to the core because the medical researchers that are here, 90% of them, 90% of PhDs that are U.S.-based, U.S.-educated, not foreign educated, U.S.-educated and PhDs that are here doing research are actually from the rest of the world. They are not from India. And these are the PhDs that are actually doing research on all. We have people in my group who are doing research on Alzheimer's, epilepsy, cures for cancer, and it's just heartbreaking. And the reason why it's so difficult for these, and they are the most vulnerable of all, is because in order to get a grant from the National Institute of Health, they need to have a green card. This is the conundrum, right? The Immigration Voice and the proponents of this legislation cling to their first come, first served methodology, but in clinging to that first come, first served methodology, they disadvantage their own PhDs from even coming to the United States. And
Right.
and it's that conundrum. And
that first come, first served mentality, because that gets them away from the merit aspect. Because again, these are quite ordinary workers. If we follow the letter of the law when it comes to merit and qualification, 30% wouldn't qualify. 30% would be sent home overnight.
Yeah, I think it's probably even more than that, but it's at least that amount. The point being, though, is that it's very difficult for the PhDs who are here, and that point is very near and dear to my heart because I wrote this actually in an email, and I've sent out many emails out to Congress and sat down and called people and spoke to them about it. My brother died from cancer. My mother died from heart disease. My father died from a stroke. There's many diseases. Cancer is reaching epidemic proportions. 37% of women are expected to have cancer at some point in their life. And it goes on from there. Alzheimer's is expected to reach epidemic proportions as well in the next 10 to 15 years as the society ages. And yet we're going to throw out these researchers. And it makes no sense to me. It leaves me just absolutely speechless.
And at the end of the day, what will happen? Because she had, in another stint, she had talked about how this isn't going to increase the numbers. Well, the reality is it will, because trust me, a year from now, when they realize what this is doing to the people in your coalition, Congress is going to have to act, and they're just going to have to widen the pool then, because just like in 1990, when it became obvious that we needed to bring in other folks than what were already pre-designated, the interests, the ethnic lobbies that had their countrymen coming in, they weren't going to give an inch. So there was so for instance, the Immigration Act in 1965, where both Robert Kennedy on the floor of the Senate, Senator McCarthy from Minnesota, said this is not going to increase the numbers, just the diversity. Well, in 1990, it increased the numbers. So so trust me, a year from now, this is going to be increasing the numbers greatly. And it is this H-1B visa abuse by American corporations that outsource to these third-party agencies, that bring the workers over, of which 80% are from India. It is the poison pill for the U.S. workers. And I'm not talking just tech workers, it's all white-collar workers. We saw, and I actually wrote about this in our blog that will go out tomorrow, our blog for tomorrow. Walmart laid off 600 accounting and clerical people in Charlotte doing back office operations. And they outsourced to Gentech, which is a New York-based outsourcing firm. And in 2017, for that work site, that Walmart work site in Charlotte, they had just 2 LCAs, 2 H-1B applications. The following year, hundreds. 2019, hundreds of more. So this is the same song once again, where they'll outsource and then they'll bring in the H-1B workers after they do the knowledge transfer. And my guess is ultimately offshore all of that.
Yeah, I feel like I'm living in the Twilight Zone right now.
Yeah.
I don't know in what parallel universe it makes sense to anybody to throw out PhDs, and that's basically what's going to happen if these people can't get particularly the PhDs, their situation is very vulnerable, as I mentioned before. But if they can't get funding, those in the biomedical and the medical research area, they can't get funding, they can't stay here, so they have to leave. So basically this first come, first served methodology is actually disadvantaging their own PhDs as well, because their own PhDs actually have the same issue. So, they're throwing out all of these incredibly talented, incredibly smart PhDs from all over the world just to do what? To bring in IT tech workers? I'm living in the Twilight Zone.
Madness. And
I have no words for that.
Yeah, and we have plenty of skilled Americans here. The problem is corporations don't want to pay the pensions. They don't want to pay the salaries. They want a workforce that's quiescent and will allow itself to be exploited. It's madness. And ultimately, it's a threat to national security. It's also a threat to the economy. I'm going to pull something up here because I'd like to get your parting thoughts. But before we leave, I want to pull up something. I'll go ahead and share my screen. And there it is. Yes. And this is an article. I know you're calling in, Adele. The headline is San Francisco's homelessness population has swelled by 17% in 2 years, with most of that growth coming from people living out of their cars. This is the working poor. And this is Zoe Lofgren's district. You know, it's amazing. And yet, she can't do anything to improve the lot of the citizens in her district, but she will gladly boot them out onto the curb for the sake of foreign nationals, because working at the behest of the business companies in the business roundtable like Microsoft, Facebook, American Airlines, JP Morgan, Walmart.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah, it leaves me speechless. There's no words to describe. They're clearly not working in the interest of their constituents. You know, they're working in foreign interests. And I was actually going to write a press release about, you know, everybody was focused on the Russian collusion for the election. I mean, this is foreign meddling and collusion at a much greater level that could have a far greater impact. I mean, particularly when you walk into a hospital and you see 1 in every 5 doctors are going to have to leave the country. This legislation passes. You know, the overwhelming predominance of PhD researchers in the medical industry are foreigners. They're going to have to leave the country too. And it's going to impact, it's going to take a wrecking ball to the biomedical industry and have such a great impact of vital interest to the United States. And for what? Because they are being lobbied by foreign national interests, by foreign nationalists. I can't fathom this.
It's the cult of neoliberalism, which wants the frictionless movement of capital and people around the globe, allowing huge profits to be made at the cost of the productive classes. So, well, Adele, look, let me know what you think of what I'm about to say. The fight is definitely on to the Senate now. I believe we can win it in the Senate, but I think priority 1 is to make sure that the unanimous consent ploy that was attempted a couple weeks ago is kept at bay. We need more senators to step up and say that they will say no. And then, this fall, we've got to fight it and beat it on the Senate floor.
Absolutely. And we'll be there.
Right on. Well, great, Adele. Look, take care. And I'm going to be working on that list of yay votes for 1044 who voted to suspend the rules, because they need letters from us. But let's not forget the people that stood by us. They all need letters of congratulations. So to our audiences, please we'll be posting this next week. Send letters to them. Remind them that, hey, we really appreciate what you did. And you probably got a lot of flack for it, but thank you.
Yeah, that's a good idea. We're going to mobilize to do that. We will mobilize our forces to do that and make sure that they do. That's actually a really great idea, because they probably withstood a tremendous amount of pressure to take a stand.
Oh, you bet. That period of time, because I think the vote was about 3:30 in the afternoon, and between 4:30 when they came back with the tabulation, you can bet those whips were up to doing what they're supposed to do, whipping up the vote. And that's where they start dropping things on, well, your district could really use this and that. So it was awesome that someone withstood.
Yeah. Thank you for your time, Kevin.
Adele, thank you so much for joining me again. Audience really always appreciates hearing from you, because you just know so much of what's going on this issue. You're a great practitioner. So Adele, thanks again. And to our audience, hey, we're posting this stuff on YouTube, so be sure to give us a thumbs up if you like it. Hey, give us a thumbs down if you don't like it. And be sure to subscribe to the channel. That way you're kept up to date on every new video we drop there. Take care and have a great week. Bye-bye.